It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. What's up? What's happening? I'm Craig Hoffman. He is Logan Paulsen, and we got a stacked show for you today. Not only talking about the Commanders getting ready for their first game after the bye with the Rams, our usual Friday show, although we will spend some time on some other things, including a visit from ESPN's Matt Miller. Their lead draft analyst will join us at the end of the show, about 20-ish minutes from right now. So we are very much looking forward to that. And unlike often when we do these interviews, Logan, we're taping this in order, so I have no idea how it went because it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, I mean, so we have to stay tuned as well to figure out how the interview went.
Yes, we have to do the tuning, if you will. I've had Matt on before, though. He's fantastic, super insightful. Often does have some scouting opinions that are different than other guys, which I think makes for interesting discussion, but a guy that's put in a lot of work. And he built up his own scouting profile and scouting stuff over the years, starting independently, eventually for The Athletic and Bleacher Report, I think, back in the day, and then has worked his way up to ESPN. So,
I have a nerdy question for you. Okay.
Yeah.
Is he scouting or is he talent evaluating? Because I made this mistake of talking to a scout about this, and I said, I'm doing a little bit of scouting. He's like, are you? And we kind of got into the differences between scouting and talent evaluation.
What's your difference?
So scouting for me is like the really gritty stuff that they do, like the personality stuff that they do, where they go to colleges and they're not watching film necessarily, but you're talking to the trainer, you're talking to the coach.
It's almost like reporting versus film watching.
Correct. That's exactly right. And so I think there is a distinction in that. And there are services that do that. They go around, they talk to people. And those people, you said he's got some different opinions, but sometimes those different opinions come from the fact that they've talked to, they've gone and talked to schools already about some of these kids. So as opposed to just talent evaluating where you're just saying, I like this player. It's the same thing that I ran into last year with DeJuan Jones, for example, on the film, extremely talented, first round talent. And you're befuddled and bamboozled as to why he's fallen to the fourth round. But then the scout is the guy that would say, he didn't do this at the pro day, he didn't do this, and this rubbed some people the wrong way, and blah, 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 blah. So there's a little bit of distinction there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. To be honest, I don't know. I'm guessing much more talent evaluation.
Most people do.
But he's been around, doing this for a decade. I'm sure he's got connections all over. And
inside baseball.
You do some of the scouting as well. So we'll have to ask him. We'll do that coming up in about 18 minutes from now. Let's start, though, with kind of looking ahead to this weekend by putting a bow on Jamin Davis' season, a guy that they're going to miss this weekend. The Rams do run the football very well, and obviously Jamin has been a good run stopper for this team. But Logan, former first-round pick, and I think obviously his first year was incredibly disappointing. He's progressively gotten better. But as we sit here entering a critical offseason for Jamin, where they'll have to decide whether to pick up his fifth-year option, which they almost certainly, the new regime, will not. But what actually is Jamin Davis as a football player? And the reason we're asking this, if people have missed this earlier in the week, is Jamin picked up a shoulder injury last week. He's on IR. His season is over. But through 3 years of Jamin Davis, what do we think he's actually turned into, aside from the initial expectations of being a first-rounder?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jamin Davis is a pretty good football player. He's a guy that I enjoy watching now. And there was a period of time where I didn't enjoy watching him. I didn't think he was doing a good job. I thought he looked out of place. I thought all the inexperience that people had kind of warned about, the scouts had warned about, was very at the forefront of his first year in the NFL. And then now, when you watch him, I see a guy who's instinctive, who's confident, who's very, very physical, which I love at the linebacker position, obviously. I think there's some times where you still see some of his, his greenness, his rawness in coverage. I think he's physically capable of doing it. I think the interception he had when he's covering Bijan Robinson against Atlanta is a perfect example. You see him match up with receivers. You're like, wow. The highs are very, very high. But I think we're all familiar with some of the struggles that he's had in coverage, and some of that is the situations they've put him in. Mm-hmm. And, from what I understand, he's kind of got the final shoulder injury now, but he's kind of been dealing with a version of that the whole year. What grade is it? How bad was it? I don't know, but this was the thing that kind of put him over the edge. So we didn't even get to see a healthy Jamin. And I think I was super excited, honestly, to watch him these last 4 games of the season because I thought it's going to be simplified. He's going to play fast. we saw flashes of some like amazing stuff. I was watching some clips with London Fletcher, and London's like, man, this is amazing that he's doing this. And I was like, I think so too. And so I thought, well, this is great. He simplified. Cody's back. When Cody's back, he plays better. So I'm disappointed for Jamin. I think he'd had a pretty solid year and, ups and downs, but I'd say he was one of the more consistent players on the defense in terms of production, a ton of tackles, physical play. And I thought this is the time where the defense simplifies. He's going to be able to play as fast as humanly possible. And you're going to get to see this guy who's this tremendous athlete kind of actualize himself and kind of honestly quite, execute the development we saw the last 4 games of last season. I thought we were going to get something very similar that was going to take him from like that, 70% range on the PFF grade and bump him into that 75, 78%, which is quite frankly one of the better guys at the position. So I think I'm very high on Jamin after this year. I think he's a good football player. And you said that the new staff would probably not renew the 5th year, and I understand why. But I think he could have made a case for himself in these last 4 games to say, I am kind of a difference maker at the position. And unfortunately, he's not going to get that opportunity.
Yeah, I think that the bigger part on the 5th-year option is like the finances of linebacker.
Sure.
Like, I agree with everything you said. I also don't know that I'd re-sign him after next year, depending on how well he plays, because like you just go draft another guy. And that's kind of the weird thing is like, I feel like he's a victim of circumstance in some way where they drafted this guy that was super green at a position where it's kind of like it's the running back of the defense, if you will. Especially his position at will, and they tried to make him a Mike. But it's like they're kind of highly replaceable in a lot of ways. And for highly replaceable positions, you don't want to pay a ton of money because it's easy to find someone else to do a pretty darn good job. And I think because of that, and because of like how it started, he's actually underrated. And I think that people don't realize how good he is. I also think that you're talking about a victim of circumstance. When I think of, I've talked about Emmanuel Forbes and Quan Martin. Yeah, DBs drafted in the 1st and 2nd round, and a DB's coach who got fired 11 games into the season or 12 games into the season, whatever it was, in this super complex defense with all these rules, and it just doesn't set guys up for success, which is why the D coordinator is no longer here. And I think Jamin is that times 3 years, where you take a guy that if he goes to a system where he's got way more clarity and he's surrounded by better players in certain spots, then or more consistency even, which is not Cole Holcomb's fault that Cole got hurt or Cody Barton's fault that he got hurt. I guess, some blame for Cody for not learning the defense faster, but it's hard. And like, that's the point. It was like, it's hard, this system. And so long winding way to say, I think Jamin as a talent is tremendous. I think now that he's got a ton of experience, you're seeing some of that talent really rise more consistently. And I think some of the areas where he struggled are extremely predictable, and it should have been on a coaching staff to help prevent some of those from happening. And whether it's, hey, okay, he struggles with a running back when he's one-on-one on the outside. Okay, well then, stick a safety out there. Like there are other ways personnel-wise, and you might have to use a different personnel grouping, but there are other ways to assign those coverage responsibilities within a defense that keeps Jamin Davis from being exposed for not being able to cover the world's best athletes in endless amounts of space. And so I think that Jamin is a very good player for the position, maybe very good strong. He's a good, and I think these last 4 games, I agree with you, could have had a chance to prove to be very good. And I'm pretty fascinated to see what new system comes defensively because he could have a monster year next year, or he could, if it's something that's complicated and complex and asks a lot of the same stuff, then they'll probably very easily move on from him after next year.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you said something there that I agree with, and that linebackers are a position of low value. But if you look at the analytics, it's really interesting, actually. Like, that is true for most of the positions. But when you say like positions of value, the PFF just put an article out about this. It's like tackle, pass rusher, outside of quarterback, obviously. And it's like linebacker ahead of receiver. And I think what the thing is there is if you have an elite linebacker, like you're talking Luke Kuechly, Ray Lewis, one of these kind of generation. Yeah. Perfect example. It elevates the defense in a way that nobody else can because you're fitting runs, you're in coverage. And I think we both agree that he was not anywhere near that level right now. But I think there was an opportunity to see a guy who could show flashes of that going into next season over these last 4 games. So as much as I agree with you, yeah, like if average linebacker play is a dime a dozen, that's totally devalued. But if there's a potential that a guy can be something really special, then I think you got to invest there. And I think, again, this is all hypothetical. I think maybe he could have shown that, which would have been awesome for the team and the organization. But obviously, the injury is going to sidetrack that, and it's going to make next year much more complicated for him.
For sure. Elite player in any position pretty much is going to elevate. Running back is kind of the weird exception to that. But like if you have a super elite guy like a Fred Warner level, that's gonna change the equation on what it means there. I think that's also why you look at like what Detroit did, taking Jack Campbell a lot higher last year in the draft than a lot of people. It's like, well, if you think he's going to be elite, then it's worth it. The question is like, how quickly can you make that investment pay off? And I think that was the gripe with the initial drafting of Jamin, however many years ago it was at this point, that you knew it wasn't going to happen instantly. And if it happens in year 4 and then you got to pay him, it's not like those years counted. You had 3 years of, and then obviously it wasn't a priority for them to develop him because they're like, we're trying to win games. Jack explicitly told me that when I asked him earlier this year. And obviously that hasn't gone great this year. Take a Man podcast from Odyssey Sports. All right, I'm Craig Hoffman. He's Logan. Let me just reset that. 3, 2. Take a Man podcast from Odyssey Sports. That's Logan Paulson. I am Craig Hoffman. And Logan, let's do a 10-minute game preview here before we talk to Matt Miller. Commanders defense versus Rams offense. Obviously, without Jamin Davis, who we just talked about, they'll have to fill that position somehow, and that run stopping is going to be very important because Kyren Williams has been incredible. I think it's been fun to watch how Sean's evolved that offense this year. They were super pass happy for a long time, but they have really become a team that will, if they can get rolling on you running the football, will just keep handing it to Kyren Williams, and they've got dudes who can smash up front, and they've had a lot of success. They obviously just put up 31 points on Baltimore last week. Stafford's playing good ball. Nakua and Kupp are playing good ball. They're dangerous, man.
They are dangerous. And so let's double click the run game thing. I think they are a team that will run the football. I don't think they're overly efficient at running the football. I think they run it as like a means to an end. They're kind of trying to dictate certain responses. And in the Baltimore game, I thought that was really interesting. Baltimore came out in 4-down personnel, basically nickel personnel. And the one thing about Cooper Kupp and Nakua specifically is they block their faces off. And so basically, LA's in 11 personnel. They ran the ball a ton, and then they forced Baltimore to get back into their 5-man front. And then they were able to throw the ball with great ease or relative ease. So I think that's kind of what Sean is. He's like, we're going to be in 11. We're going to try and dictate to you in terms of getting the response we want and then hit it. But, we talked about, Sean and the evolution of this offense. And I think the one thing offensively about them that's super unique compared to like Mike McDaniels or even Kyle with Brock Purdy is that this is a quarterback-centric offense, unlike those other offenses, which are more like scheme-driven. Like we're trying to throw drift with Tua. He's like this ultimate point guard, kind of facilitating, using his excellent ball handling and his quick release to get the ball out. This is like on Matthew Stafford. It's like, if I see the play, I'm going to check to a different play. We're going to move some guys around. We're going to run this, 2-man beater, and you're going to look really silly. And he does an excellent job of that. So there's a ton on his plate. You mentioned like the physicality of what he's been doing. I mean, his ability to throw the football is extremely high level. He's seen everything. Nuts. He's very talented. He's probably, I don't know, he's by some of the more advanced metrics like EPA, big time throws, things like that. He's like top 5 in every category of those kind of more obscure metrics because obviously yards, touchdowns, not quite there, but he's playing the position at a really high level. I think the thing that sticks out to me is they're so reliant on him at times, like to make stuff happen, is that the offense goes through these kind of weird doldrums where you're watching the play, you're like, that's an amazing throw, amazing catch, great job by Nakua here, great job by Kupp winning this one-on-one. And they hit this stretch where it's like, a couple 3-and-outs in a row, and you're like, what's going on? And then all of a sudden they don't score for a quarter or, quarter and a half. And it's like, oh my gosh, like this offense looks so sharp early. So I do think that while they are very talented, they've got a ton of weapons. They've got an amazing playmaker at quarterback. You mentioned the running game. Williams is the running back's name. What's his name?
Kyren Williams, yeah.
Kyren Williams, yeah. He does have a propensity to kind of find explosive runs, and they don't do anything overly complicated from a run game standpoint. It's like duo in Wanda, just out of some different personnel groupings than you'd expect with 11, most likely. So, but they hit these weird doldrums. So I think we'll talk about the defense here in a second, but it gives you, and they're not like this explosive group. I mean, obviously Nakua makes explosive plays, Cup makes explosive plays, but it's not like Miami where it's like every time they touch the ball, it's a huge play. It's like a beautiful route where they find the zone, they catch the ball, or they run a double move on the corner and they're catching it near the sideline and going out of bounds. There's that stuff there for them for sure, but that kind of like dagger to the heart play that Tyreek Hill had against us, before the bye week, that's not really there the same way. So I feel like offensively they let you kind of hang out for a little bit more than they should, and for a team like Washington, that at least gives you a chance, especially given how their defense has been playing.
Yeah, don't get down early. That would be great. Please get some stops and hope that one of those doldrums comes early, and then the pressure's on, and the competitive juices get flowing in a different way, and it's a different ball game. I mean, the scores Washington has lost by recently are scores you do not see very commonly in the NFL, and so a competitive game I think would be great. And the Rams can give you that opportunity. They also can jump out early. Sean's very good as a game planner. Get that first 15, and then they hit the skids. They hit that or I guess the doldrum. They don't keep gliding down the ice. They stop. Yeah. And so it's funny because you say that, and I remember having some of those feelings occasionally when Sean was here covering him. It's like, why did they just die it for the third quarter? And then they'd put together a 2-minute drive at the end, and it would or wouldn't work. But that's also the nature of the game is teams make adjustments. You beat us with this. Now we're going to work our butts off to stop this. And how quickly do you adjust to that? And I think that's going to become the key to the game, really. Commanders' defense is how many adjustments do they have, considering they're trying to simplify things down, and how quickly can Sean make them with the personnel he's got, with Stafford, with Williams, with these receivers, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think the other thing there is like the point total that they're putting up is not great. Like it's really weird watching because they they're getting all these bunches. I think they're number one in the NFL in terms of getting in bunches. They put people in blenders. They really challenge your rules. You're like, this is great scheme, great check by Stafford, great throw by Stafford, great route. And you're like, they have 19 points. Like, what's going on here? You know what I'm saying? So like, you
got to finish in the red zone.
Yeah,
that's challenging.
The offensive football is excellent, and they're going to present a ton of challenges, but they don't score a ton of points. And they are really predicated on the big plays. So it is from that standpoint. I think obviously the nuance that Sean and the offense brings is going to be really challenging. But I think couple that with the defense and what the defense has been doing. They bust coverages all the time. They're third in the NFL in giving up explosive plays after us, of course. But you know what I'm saying? Like they do give you opportunities. And when you watch that Baltimore game, guys are wide open. They've just dropped coverages. And I do feel like Sam, this is not Miami's defense. This is not Dallas's defense. I think this is a get right game for Sam. And because of those explosive play opportunities, I think, again, like I don't think they're going to win this game, but this feels more realistic than the Miami game, than the Dallas game. It feels like there's an opportunity, a realistic opportunity for them to get some big explosive chunks on guys that are going to be running wide open. And then for the defense to kind of luck into a doldrum that the LA offense is having. And then you're up 21-19 in the third quarter for some reason. You're like, oh, wow, look at this. And then can you hang on and finish the game out?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. The things that scare me are, hey, the Rams offense needs the big plays. Well, this team is giving them out at the highest rate in the league. And then I think on the other side of it,
they don't do well with bunches, and they don't do well with elite quarterback
Right, you said
play,
bunches, and I was like, oh, great, cool. They'll pass it off to nobody, and try not to be cynical about it, but this is one of the things that Rivera had to clean up and the new DB's coaches had to work on, because that was a disaster for them in the early part of the season, which is why they're sitting at 4-9. Another area where they've really struggled is with interior pressure, and hello, Aaron Donald. He's not coming to town because the game's in LA. You're going to visit Aaron Donald. And so that is worrisome, I would say, to say the least. And I think it's going to be on EB to try to mitigate some of that. Like, can you move the pocket? Can you do some of the things that they have had success with this year to keep Sam upright, to give him the opportunities to get the ball downfield? And I do think, to your point, like the mentality that Sam has of like looking for big plays, that could work to Washington's advantage in this game because they might pop available. But we've also seen him miss some opportunities to make big throws down the field. And so it's a fine balance that experience is a great teacher of. And, Sam is, I guess, a bye week more experienced than he was the last time we talked. So it's a matter of, does he do it? Did he see anything on the bye week to kind of change the way he sees the field, that he can take advantage of some of these coverage busts and big plays if they become available?
Yeah, and I think and I think the thing is, like, while Aaron Donald is tremendous, for 5 years, half a decade, he was the most impactful non-quarterback in the NFL. And he's not playing like that, but he's still definitely a top 5 player at the position. So he still creates a ton of pressure. He's still super dynamic. But outside of him, there's not like it's not this group with a ton of teeth. Like when you watch Miami, you're like, ooh, like this is going to be tough. When you watch Dallas, you're like, really tough. It's not quite like that. And in the back end, there's a little bit more space. Like this is a defense that's, probably, I don't know the exact ranking, but I'm assuming in like between 27 and 21 in terms of defensive rank. Like they're okay. And they're kind of bad, and
stylistically, maybe more like a Philadelphia where there's more space to operate, and maybe Sam has, the cleaner view of things suits his eyes a little better.
Yeah, and they want to run a defense similar to what Miami runs. They just don't run it as well, and they're not as sharp. They have guys that are less experienced in the defense, and they've got a bunch of young guys playing key roles. So you can exploit this group. So I think to your point, if you can protect them, you can account for Aaron Donald, which is a big lift and big ask, but Baltimore did a great job of that. They were pretty much like, he is not beating us. We're going to have a back help out. We're going to have the slide to him. We're going to do all this stuff. And then I did a breakdown of it this week, but like when you're always sending the slide to Aaron Donald, you need to be aware of like these simulated 5-man pressures, which we've had a hard time with. So like, what is your plan for that? If you're EB, they can do it. Just don't let those pressure packages beat you and let Sam deal. And I think that's what EB wants to do, is let Sam deal. And I think you're going to be in a good spot to put up some points, which is something that when this team has been in games, the offense has put up points, the defense has found some stops, and you come out with something more competitive from a football standpoint. I'm not very confident they're going to win, but I do think this is going to be a competitive outing, and I think they can win this game, which is way different than I felt, last
Miami
week or the
and
week
Dallas.
before. Yeah, right.
For sure. We will do obviously much more on the game itself on the Take Command pregame show. We are back at Tap Sports Bar, MGM National Harbor this weekend, starting at 1:00. So we will see you at MGM. By the way, Rams defense 18th overall in yards,
almost,
which is what they do for total defense. All right. So that's the first part of this show. Here we are 20 minutes later. Let's get to the second. Let's get to Matt Miller, ESPN NFL draft analyst, joining us here on Take Command. Continuing on the Take Command podcast, time to welcome in today's guest, ESPN NFL draft analyst, Matt Miller. Matt, welcome to the show, man. Great to have you.
Yeah, it's good to be on with you guys. Unfortunately, it's draft season already for Commanders fans, but it's good news for people in my line of work, right? That we it's early to mid-December, we're getting called up. I'll tell you, when I was at Bleacher Report for a decade, and it'd always be funny in those editorial meetings. Every week I'd pop in like to the Zoom call and I'd be like, okay, are Browns fans talking about the draft yet? So it's like, it's not Browns fans anymore, but it's like, I always knew like, okay, it's like week 10, Browns fans are talking about the draft. It's time to call Matt into the lineup. So it's a good time of year for me.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's a good time for year for us because getting you on is, I'm sure, much easier now than it will be in like February and March. So we'll take the exclusivity as everyone else cares about, the playoffs. So Logan asked me a question to start the podcast that I thought was actually very interesting, and I don't know in terms of your background and how you kind of approach what you do on the media side of this, the answer to it. But he asked, hey, does Matt do more scouting or more talent evaluation? Talent evaluation being like, hey, what's on tape? Scouting being all of the other stuff that goes into a player profile. So how do you approach the job, and how does that change from now at the end of college football season until the NFL draft?
No, that's such a great question. And I almost wish there was you could have like a resume on social media that says like, hey, here's how I do things, because that really like leads to a bigger jumping off point even of like, how do you do a mock draft? Is it what you would do, or is it what you think teams will do? And it's just this like philosophical question that we could spend hours talking about. So short answer, both. And I came up in this industry. I always wanted to be a scout. I wanted to work for a team and scout players, and I think that's why journalism always appealed to me, because you're trying to find out the truth about a player. And so I still approach the job the same way of, I'm going to watch every game that I possibly can, understanding that there are about 700 players that we have to be aware of, right? I'm not going to lie to you guys and pretend like I've watched 12 games on Duke's right guard. No, I haven't, but quarterbacks, especially, you watch every game. And then for everyone else, you prioritize the best you can, understanding that you're a one-person scouting department. So try to watch as much as I can. But, I've been in this business 13 years. And so I've seen it change. And one thing that has helped me over those 13 years is that I do now have, connections with different teams, whether it be area scouts, director, player personnel, general managers, college coaches, where you can say, hey, help me narrow this list down, because it's impossible to watch everyone. One of the greatest things that has happened in my career is going to ESPN, where there's a system of, if I want to watch every throw Caleb Williams has made in the red zone, I can click a couple buttons and have those ready. Before that, it was, God, how am I going to watch all these guys? So just having access to better technology, and the NCAA is very protective about their game film. So even just having access to that is huge. So I try to do both. You talk to scouts, talk to coaches, find out what's going on behind the scenes, so that can better inform me, based on what I've seen from the players.
And then, like, to Craig's question, like, how does that change over the next couple of months, really? You know what I'm saying? Because, like, I feel like there's always this, like, there's the end of season kind of mock draft formula where you kind of see the same 32 guys. Then all of a sudden, Daniel Jeremiah will put his out. He's pretty dialed in, and there's 5 or 6 names on there. You're like, who the heck are these guys? Because he's been talking and he's been kind of doing that scouting process. How does that change for you over the next couple of months?
Yeah, so I actually just put my first mock draft out this week, and I like to think I had some names in there that the general draft fan maybe wasn't familiar with, like Tyrion Arnold from Alabama is my number 1 corner. I try not to absorb a lot of draft content, because I love Daniel Jeremiah, I love Mel Kiper Jr., but I don't want their rankings getting in my head. So I try not to look at those things and just have, hey, here's who I think are the guys. So like Tyrion Arnold, my number 1 corner, Enos Rakestraw from Missouri, my number 2 corner. So like, that's just based on what I've seen and conversations I've had with scouts. You're right. January, when we all get to the Senior Bowl, everything is going to get blown up, because you start having more of those in-person conversations. I was on the phone with the general manager 2 nights ago, and he was driving to have dinner with all his scouts. He's like, oh, all our scouts are in. Let me run some names by you, because he's an NFL general manager and he's getting caught up because he's got his own to do during the season, right? And so it's like, it's so much easier to do a deep dive after January 13th, because the deadline for underclassmen has passed. So we're not worried about Shedeur Sanders and Carson Beck anymore. They're going back to school. Let me focus on Jaden Daniels and JJ McCarthy. So you're able to cut your list. You're able to see, okay, who's going to the Shrine Bowl? Who's going to the Senior Bowl? Peek behind the curtain. I prioritize those guys, because if you don't get a Shrine invite or a Senior Bowl invite, the chances of you being drafted are really slim. And, that is one area my job has changed a lot. With the TV side of things, day 3 of the draft, I'm going to spend so much time studying those players. And so if you don't make the Senior Bowl, Shrine Bowl, Combine, like if you don't get an invite to one of those 3 things, the chance that I'm going to do a deep dive on you is pretty small, unless someone vouches for you. So that's another part of it, Logan. Like, you start to just cut your list, and those events help. So it's not even just, it's like, oh man, like DJ put out his top 32. Let me go look at that. I mean, it's more of like scouts start talking and you're like, wait, why didn't I have Xavier Watts from Notre Dame higher? Right. Players like that. So it's more conversations like that happening.
Interesting.
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned you just put out your first mock. I'm guessing you did this before Monday Night Football and never expected the Giants to win, because they wound up at that 4th pick in your mock, and then all of a sudden everyone wakes up the next morning. It's like, wait, they won. They should be 5th. Which I only bring up not to be like, hey, what happened there, but because I think it becomes a very interesting question if Jaden Daniels, who for you is quarterback 3, is available at 4 for Washington, which based off that Monday night result is where they would pick. So when you look at what Sam Howell has been as a pro so far, and if you're that GM making the decision, whoever that will ultimately be for Washington, assuming they have massive changes that we all expect, like how many quarterbacks would you be considering and really wanting to look at as this guy could be better than what I think Sam Howell can be better than, which is kind of asking you 2 questions in one, your top quarterbacks and also what you think of
I was
Sam.
about to say, man, that's not a fair question because, he's doing his draft stuff, and now you're like, I got to do the eval on Sam Howell too. So, mock drafts suck, by the way. So good for you. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, so I love mock drafts, though. That's my favorite part of the job, honestly.
Seriously? You're a
hard
psycho.
to do. Yeah, but I love doing those. So, Craig, you know, I was not the biggest Sam Howell guy. I had a 3rd round grade on him. Commanders fans got pissed because someone found like my eval of like my comp for him coming out of college was Colt McCoy, which to me was a compliment. Colt was a damn good college quarterback. He just had a shoulder injury that ruined his arm, but he played in the NFL for like 14 years. So it wasn't the knock that people wanted it to be. So I was not, I had a 3rd round grade on Sam Howell. I think he's played above my expectations this year to the point that you have to do that linear evaluation. Okay, Caleb Williams, let's evaluate Sam Howell versus where we think Caleb can be. Also with the understanding Sam's 2 years into a 4-year deal. So you have to think about, we're going to have to pay this guy if he's the guy. Same with Drake May, same with Jaden Daniels, same with JJ McCarthy. My philosophy this year, whether they're in the 4th, 5th slot, somewhere right there, is if it's not Caleb Williams, you build around Sam Howell. Like Caleb's the only guy that I would say, let's see what we can get for Sam Howell. Let's call New England. Let's call Atlanta. Let's see, what kind of draft capital can we get? And, I think the other thing that you have to do, so I would start end of the year. You got a new general manager, new head coach. The first thing I'm doing is calling Ryan Poles, the general manager in Chicago, and saying, do you believe in Justin Fields? Is Justin Fields in 3 first-round picks? Do you believe in that more than you believe in Caleb Williams? Because if so, we'll give you the Bryce Young package. We'll come up to
kidding.
1 and draft Caleb Williams. I think, why not call him? He traded out of it last year. Why not call and say, hey, Justin Fields looked pretty good since that thumb injury. What if we give you?
So just real quick, you like Fields more than Howell, like by that much?
No, not by that. No, what I'm saying is, like, if you're Chicago, can you talk Chicago into keeping Justin Fields with 3 more with you giving them draft picks? I like Justin as a runner more than Sam Howell. I think Howell has been better as a passer. And so it's just like, it goes to that, like, how do you want to build your team? And I think for Chicago and Washington, those are huge questions. So, no, I wouldn't kick Sam Howell to the curb for Drake May. I just wouldn't. Same for, I love Jaden Daniels. I'm a huge Jaden Daniels fan. That conversation might be a little more interesting because I think, Drake's 20 years old. JJ McCarthy's 21 years old. These guys, I don't know that they're ready to step in and be CJ Stroud, so there's going to be a developmental period where it does go to would we rather have Marvin Harrison Jr. with Sam Howell? Would we rather have Olu Fashanu or Joe Alt with Sam Howell? How much better can Sam look? And, that's really one of those things, like, unless you're in that building, seeing his work ethic and practice habits and film study, like, it would be disingenuous for me to sit here having watched, 12 Commanders games and say, no, like, Sam Howell's not the guy, or yeah, Sam Howell's the guy, because I think so much of it is going to be what's happening behind closed doors that can make you believe he can continue to get better.
Yeah, and so one of the things you said there that I thought was interesting is, like, if you were to tier, let's say your top 15 guys, like, who's tier 1? Because everyone does these linear drafts, and it makes sense. Like, it's a linear big board. But, like, I don't think of the draft that way, because it's like, who are the best players? Are they in the same tier? And like, you kind of said something there about the quarterbacks, which I thought was interesting. Like, there was one guy that's kind of head and shoulders above everybody else. How do those other quarterbacks shake out in comparison to, like, a Marvin Harrison Jr. or the edge rusher from UCLA or, one of these top tier tackles, right? So can you kind of give us some insight on that?
Yeah, I think there's a clear top tier this year. I would say that's Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Olu Fashanu. Like, I feel comfortable saying those guys are in a group by themselves. Yeah, like, they're in most drafts, they would be the number 1 overall player. It's like, they're that good. Even like, if Caleb Williams had been in the draft last year, he would have gone first overall. And that's, we could say what we want about, did the Panthers make the right call with Bryce Young? He would have gone first overall. I think, the quarterbacks are always going to get inflated. Most drafts, Olu Fashanu would be a number 1 overall player. Marvin Harrison Jr. would be a number 1 overall player, even if they're not the first pick, because
Sure.
we understand quarterbacks go first, but they would be the top ranked player. I think after that, there's a drop off. After that, you get into Drake May, quarterback North Carolina. You get into Joe Alt, the left tackle from Notre Dame. I think that's where you see Leatu Latu, the DN from UCLA that you mentioned. Medicals are going to be huge for him, to where we could be talking about a top 10 pick, or we could be talking about a second round pick with him. Sure. Dallas Turner from Alabama, pass rusher, is right in that group as well, I would say. Brock Bowers, the tight end from Georgia. You got 3 wide receivers I would put in there: Keon Coleman, Florida State; Malik Neighbors, LSU; and Roma Dunze from Washington. And then after that, you get to another tier after that. So, like guys that I will have a true first round grade on, it's probably like 11 or 12 this year. I think in a quote unquote normal year, you're probably going to have 15, 16. So in terms of like true blue chip talent, and I should have mentioned, I would put Jaden Daniels right in that group too, probably at the tail end of it. True first round grades, those are the guys I would put in there.
In that tier 2 group, you're saying, with Jaden Daniels?
Yeah.
So
I'm a Jaden Daniels fan, guys.
It's interesting.
We'll see what happens with whomever gets hired there and what the offense looks like. But no player improved more in college football this year than Jaden Daniels, and I love to see that from quarterbacks. Like, 2022, he was good, but he wasn't this. And you see the work he put in, and then you're like, damn, that dude took off. And it's not like artificial. He got better at certain skill sets that are obvious to see on film, and that's where you get pretty excited.
So let me ask you that kind of follow-up to go deeper on that, though, because I feel like sometimes that's a little scary, is like what actually happens is a guy figures out college football, and it's like, oh, is he ever going to be able to make the next step and figure out the NFL? So how do you try to differentiate a guy who figured out college football versus a guy that made a huge, significant leap like Jaden Daniels did that can carry that kind of improvement into the league?
What helps is when you play in the SEC West. So if you're at LSU, like, come on, you're not playing. It's not at Colorado, you're playing the best of the best in the SEC week in and week out. And we were talking about corners earlier, Tyrion Arnold, Enos Rakestraw, Kool-Aid McKinstry, Kamari Lassiter. There are just 4 corners right there from the SEC. They're going to be first round picks. So you're seeing the best talent. And so I think you always have that worry. Hey, this guy's 22. He's playing against 19-year-olds. Did it just click for him because he's physically at his peak, or is it because he's been in college for 4 years and it clicked? Those are all questions that you have to answer. And I think what helps me with Jaden Daniels specifically is I've talked to coaches at LSU that say, no, what clicked was the work ethic. He started to understand what he had to do to be great. And he was in here every day working his ass off. He gained like 15 pounds of muscle because he knew he needed to get better there. I can watch his 2022 tape and see him dropping his eyes and running around like crazy when he gets pressured. I watch him in 2023. Eyes are downfield. He gets pressured. He understands he has numbers, and he's layering it over the top to 2 really good receivers, and Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr.
I was about to say, man, he's got some good receivers
he's got
too.
Some dudes. Yeah. I always say, like, so did Joe Burrow. So did CJ Stroud. It's like, and I think last year someone asked Hendon Hooker about that, and he said, it's not my fault my receivers get open, and he's right. It's not, it's like you would be dumb not to throw to them because they're open. Yeah. So
do you hit him in timing and do you hit him accurately? Yeah.
And I think that's where, like, I love the analytics side of things. It helps me do my job, but there's no substitute to turning on the tape and seeing, man, I'm watching this guy make plays with his eyes and arm in the pocket that he never made before. And that's where, like, I get excited about his development.
Yeah, so you said something interesting earlier when you were talking about Caleb Williams and how you would potentially trade up for him. If one of those 3 guys that you mentioned aren't there when Washington, I guess, is picking at 4, is that right, Craig? 4?
Yeah, with where we are right now, they're picking 4th. Obviously, 4 games to go.
And obviously, how quarterbacks tend to go, and you seem very high on Sam Howell. Like, would you trade back out of that 4th pick if you make the decision to stay with Sam? And it does seem like that second tier is pretty meaty with some good football players in it, and you can get back out of there and still get a good football player.
I think trading back is certainly on the table, and I'm not trying to like hedge here at all. It really depends on what happens at 2-3. So let's say, just for fun, Chicago takes Caleb Williams, New England takes Drake May, the Arizona Cardinals take Marvin Harrison Jr. you're sitting at 4 with Olu Fashanu on the board.
Take
you
him.
just take him.
He's the first tier,
right?
man. You got to take him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Top tier. And I like Joe Alt as well, but the difference between those guys is significant enough for me that you don't risk it. You don't risk, hey, what if we move back? Especially where you have a division rival, the New York Giants, sitting at 5. Don't help them. Like, don't give them potentially a good player. So in that scenario, you take Fashanu and you feel great about it. And then round 2, you're like, hey, let's get some receivers in round 2. And this is a fun study. And you guys, if you get some downtime, do this. Look at the best left tackles in the NFL. Most of them were first-round picks.
Right.
Now, you want to look at the best wide receivers in the NFL? You got a laundry list of guys round 2, round 3. So, could you find, an A.J. Brown type talent, the top round 2, or Deebo Samuel? Hell yeah, it happens every year. So,
especially
if you
this
can
year
get
too, right?
Fashanu, right? I had 8 wide receivers going to my round 1 mock draft. That would be a record. And there were like 2 or 3 more guys I probably could have fit in there. So the wide receiver class is so deep. And I know fans, Washington fans, you guys have a lot of needs. That's just where you're at. You're drafting 4. You obviously have some needs, but you can stack the board pretty well this year, I think. If you go tackle round 1, whether it's edge rusher or wide receiver in round 2, like there's good depth there.
Well, that's kind of what I wanted to ask next is you actually have what I would consider potentially a small number of quarterbacks, only 4, I think, going, or 3, 4, 4 going in your first round, all of whom are going in the top 10, as you've got J.J. McCarthy from Michigan going very high. But Bo Nix is going to be in the mix. Michael Penix from Washington is going to be in the mix. There might be a couple of others by the time the process is over. And then you have Washington sitting at the top of the second round with their pick and the Bears pick. Who are some of the guys that like, how would you grade like the position Washington is in with those 2 picks at the top of the second round? Because you said there's maybe not as many guys with the first round grade this year, but is that next second tier deep enough at the right positions that it could be extremely beneficial to Washington?
Yeah, definitely. And, I'll go back to, this is a great class for wide receivers. It's a great class for offensive tackles. So, and especially, the right tackle position, I know Andrew Wiley's there. The jury, I think, is out on the job that he's done this year, but the draft is deep enough at those positions that you could be pretty excited. Corner is going to be deep in round 2. I know, last year getting Forbes in the first round, we're definitely going to see a new defensive system in there. So that will be interesting to see, how well Forbes fits with whatever comes in. But I think at those, what you would consider premium positions, there is that good depth. So top of round 2, probably not at quarterback is the one thing I'm going to say, because I do think those 4 guys are going to go fairly early. Bo Nix might even go late first round. I think we could see a team try to jump back up if you like Bo Nix. The guy started 60 games in college. So anything you want to see, you can see it on tape. SEC, Pac-12, he played at both. Really good at attacking outside the hashes, really good intermediate timing. He's athletic. I could see him having a strong enough pre-draft process that someone late first round tries to get back in, and to make him the guy. Especially because I think last time I counted, there were like 12 teams that could make a change at quarterback, and we're talking about 4 going in the first round. So Bo Nix and Michael Penix become pretty valuable in that scenario, especially where the free agent quarterbacks this year, Kirk Cousins and Ryan Tannehill. Like, I don't know that anybody's beating down any doors to sign those guys, especially with Kirk coming off an injury. So it does get pretty interesting on how are you going to fill those quarterback needs with, again, another long conversation. NIL has changed quarterback in the draft. The days of guys, okay, hey, it's been 4 years, I'll enter the draft. That's gone. We got Tyler Show going 7 years in college at this point. And so that middle market of quarterbacks is Cam Ward, Washington State is transferring. He would be a guy that would normally be in the draft, and you would say, hey, that's a good mid-round quarterback. Now those guys aren't jumping in. And so it feels like we're going to get to this point where there's going to be round 1 quarterbacks, and then there's going to be late day 3 quarterbacks, and there might not be a whole lot in the middle.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about the offensive side of the ball here. In terms of defensive, like blue chippers, are there any? And do you think that, like, kind of, one of the positions that was really kind of rich last year was that edge rusher in that early second round? Are there going to be guys there that can play some football?
Yeah, so it's a light class defensively, especially in terms of blue chippers. I would say Turner at Alabama and Latu at UCLA have the potential to be there. Again, with Latu, medicals are going to be a huge part of that evaluation. I think particularly the edge rusher spot is interesting this year because you're going to have guys who are there early round 2. They're going to be values. It's just a matter of whether they can be a scheme fit. Like Chop Robinson at Penn State is fascinating to me because his production was through the roof. I think his pass rush win rate was like 20%. But he's listed at 255 pounds, and I don't believe that for a second. I think he's 240, 245 is what he looks like on the field. So, that's just going to be a question of, hey, he's undersized, however you want to slice it, even if he puts on some weight throughout the process. So you're going to have guys like that, who are available potentially top of round 2. It's just, do you like the scheme fit? On the opposite end, Chris Braswell from Alabama, he's been overshadowed by Will Anderson Jr., overshadowed by Dallas Turner. He's just a really good player, plays with power, sets the edge well, has, that first step burst. He's probably going to be available early round 2, especially if you're running a defense where a guy has, really almost exclusively stood up in college. That could be something that's a really good fit depending on what kind of scheme you're running. So I do think there will be a conversation, maybe 3 to 4 guys at the edge position that are available. It's a very weak defensive tackle class, which I know you guys are, you've got 2 very, very good defensive tackles in there. But it's weak at safety and off-ball linebacker. It doesn't look like it's going to be super loaded this year either.
Last thing for you, Matt, and I can't believe I'm the one asking about this position, but when you talk about building around Howell, a tight end would be quite nice. So how's the tight end class look?
Brock Bowers is a stud. That's easy. That's the easiest evaluation maybe in this
Wow,
year's
that's
draft.
Great insight.
He's kind of an interesting one though, because he's a little undersized, right? Like he's not your 6'7" body type.
Stop.
We're just trying to paint a picture. I'm trying to paint a picture for the audience that when you think about stud tight end, you think about like the 6'7", kind of Rob Gronkowski body type. Yeah, Travis Kelce. Yeah, he's different, even if he's still awesome.
Bowers is different. 6'4", 245. I think he's very similar to George Kittle.
I was going to say Kittle. Look at you, Matt. I knew we'd get along so well.
Right. And honestly, it's a similar play style of that, like, rough tumble, I'm going to run over you. It's not the, like, pretty boy Kyle Pitts, like, split me out, I'll run vertical. It's like, no, I'm going to run through you if you get in front of me. He's, great effort as a blocker, very, very strong. So he's going to go early. I'm obsessed with Jatavian Sanders at Texas. I don't know if he's going to declare for the draft yet, but I think he's a top 40 player if he comes out. He's more of your, motion guy, flex tight end, really, really good up the seam. He is a good downfield blocker. He's not an inline guy. That's just not his game. But it's a weak tight end class, which is understandable because last year was maybe the greatest tight end class of all time. And we're seeing those early benefit, Sam Laporta, Trey McBride, like so many of those dudes are just blowing up already. Kate Otten is having a quietly really good year in Tampa. So as much as there are teams, I live south of Kansas City and I'm like banging the table, like guys, should have drafted a tight end last year and they didn't. And now it's like, Kelsey's getting triple teamed and because you don't have any wide receivers, it'd be great to have a tight end in the wings for your 35-year-old, who's now dating the most famous person on the planet. This is not the year to try to find that starter level tight end if you're not drafting in the top 35.
We'll see how many times the Commanders are drafting in the top 35. That's still in play, so we'll see.
You might be
Matt
okay.
Miller. Matt Miller. You can read his work, ESPN.com. The mock draft out and now, the first one, many more to come. And Matt, hopefully this is the first of at least a couple conversations that we'll have between now and April. Yeah,
let's do it. Senior Bowl is a month and some change away. So a lot to talk about, guys. Always a lot to talk about.
No doubt about it. All right, thanks, Matt, and thanks everybody for listening to Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do it.
Very, very smart.